Everyone knows the name Copernicus, the man who figured out that the Earth revolves around the sun and changed the way we think about the universe. But who was Nicholas Copernicus? What led him to his theory of the solar system? And what can a visitor to Poland today see of the world that he lived in? In Poland, Copernicus is celebrated as a national hero. In the capital, Warsaw, there's an enormous statue of Copernicus in the city center. In fact, just about every city in Poland seems to claim some connection to Copernicus, and you can find statues and memorials just about everywhere. But Copernicus's first language would actually have been German. He was born Nicholas Kopernik, only later taking the Latinized version of his name. Even so, he would have been a subject of the King of Poland, and it makes sense that modern Poles consider him one of their own. If you're visiting Poland and you're keen on walking in Copernicus's footsteps, a good place to start is the city of Torun, located about 60 miles northwest of Warsaw. Copernicus was born here in 1473. In fact, he's said to have been born in this house, a Gothic red brick building with an ornate facade and steep gables. We don't know for certain that he was born in this house, but we do know that this was one of several homes that belonged to Copernicus's family. Today, it's a museum with exhibits that showcase Copernicus's life and times. Copernicus's father was a wealthy merchant. His office might have looked something like this. While you're in Torun, you're going to want to check out the Old Town Hall, where you'll find this portrait of Copernicus. It's very famous, and I know you've seen it many times, including at the top of his Wikipedia page, and even at the start of this video. Here, you'll come face to face with the original. I imagine the painting might dominate whatever room it was displayed in, but it's just the opposite. It's fairly small, and hangs alongside a dozen or so portraits of other historic figures in a second-floor gallery. More impressive is this enormous bronze statue of Copernicus just outside, by the southeast corner of the building. I think it's the most striking of all the Copernicus monuments. Copernicus studied at the University of Krakow and later at Bologna in Italy, where he focused on canon law, the laws governing the rights and responsibilities of church leaders. He would later earn a medical degree at Padua, near Venice. At Krakow, the most important Copernican site is the Collegium Maius, dating from the 15th century. It's the oldest surviving university building in Poland. Among the college's many exhibits, you'll find an array of astronomical instruments from Copernicus's time, an assortment of astronomical texts and manuscripts. And I was surprised to find this, a much more recent item, a photograph of the Earth taken by astronaut Neil Armstrong during the Apollo 11 mission. Armstrong donated it to the college in 1973 to mark Copernicus's 500th birthday. Copernicus's uncle was a powerful bishop, and after his father died, his uncle supported his education and his travels. In 1497, Copernicus settled in the city of Frombork in the province of Warmia on the Baltic Sea. Back then, the city was known by its German name, Frauenburg. After returning from Italy with his medical degree in 1510, he remained in Poland for the rest of his life. Frombork is about 150 miles north of Warsaw and just 8 miles from the border of the Kaliningrad region, which belongs to Russia. It's a little bit off the beaten tourist track, but if you're interested in Copernicus, you've got to go to Frombork. This is Frombork Cathedral. This is where Copernicus lived and worked for the final decades of his life, and it's here that he wrote his masterpiece on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres, completely changing our understanding of the cosmos. It's actually much more than just a cathedral. As you can see in this view from the bell tower, the cathedral is surrounded by an entire fortified complex. It's like a miniature walled city. The fortifications, with their red brick walls and rounded turrets, rest on foundations dating back to the 14th century. Today, visitors enter the Frombork complex via a footbridge that crosses a dry moat, leading to the massive main gate. The Bishop's Palace at the east end of the complex is now a museum, displaying artifacts relating to Copernicus's work, including his writings on subjects like cartography and economics, a reminder of just how wide-ranging his interests were. Copernicus was also in demand as a medical man. We know that he tended to his uncle's frequent medical complaints. His other patients and his administrative duties kept him busy. And of course he was a churchman. His uncle appointed him as a canon, a position just below that of priest. But Copernicus's true passion was the universe. He had been interested in the stars and planets since childhood. In 1497, while still a student, he took great interest in an occultation of the star Aldebaran by the moon. An occultation is when the moon passes directly in front of a star, blocking it from view. He was similarly captivated by a lunar eclipse in 1500. So what was it that led Copernicus to envision the heavens in a new way? The old view was that everything, the planets, the sun, even the stars, revolved around the Earth. That's known as a geocentric or Earth-centered model. But the thing is, it worked. You could use the old system to predict the motion of the planets reasonably well. Plus, it seemed to mesh with common sense. After all, the Earth doesn't feel like it's moving, right? But Copernicus wondered if things might work out more simply if the sun were placed at the center, if we lived in a sun-centered or heliocentric system. In some ways, it wasn't such a radical move. You could think of it as just swapping the positions of the Earth and the sun. And in fact, the idea wasn't completely original. A handful of ancient Greek thinkers, including Aristarchus of Samos, had the same idea almost 18 centuries earlier. But for whatever reason, it never caught on, and those early thinkers never worked out the mathematical details. So Copernicus revived the heliocentric model, and he saw that it worked. It wasn't much better for working out planetary positions, but it was far more elegant. Copernicus would later write of the marvelous symmetry of the new system. Copernicus knew that some people would find his idea of a sun-centered system hard to swallow, and especially the idea that the Earth was just another planet, one that was zooming through space at what must be an enormous speed. We don't feel like we're moving, right? And yet, here was Copernicus saying that we're moving around the sun at a speed that turns out to be almost 20 miles per second. The complete explanation wouldn't come until the work of Galileo and Newton, but the key idea is that everything on the Earth, people, trees, mountains, the atmosphere, all of it is moving along together with the Earth. There's no relative motion between us and the Earth, and that's why we don't notice that we're moving. An example from the 21st century is the experience of flying in a modern passenger jet. You're moving at many hundreds of miles per hour, but as long as there's no turbulence, you really don't feel it. But astronomers wondered, if the Earth is moving around the sun, wouldn't there be other evidence of that motion? After all, if Copernicus is right, the Earth should be in one spot in January and a very different spot 6 months later in July. And that means our view of the stars ought to change over the course of a year. Stars that are nearby should shift a little bit compared to stars that are further away, because of this changing perspective. Copernicus realized there was only one explanation for why we don't see that shift. The universe, he concluded, must be very, very big. Incidentally, that shift in the position of stars, astronomers call it parallax, was eventually observed, but not until the 19th century. There was something else that Copernicus worried about. The heliocentric model appeared to challenge what the Bible said about the workings of the cosmos. In the book of Joshua, for example, there's a passage that seems to describe the sun moving around the Earth, not the Earth moving around the sun. Copernicus didn't want to provoke controversy and managed to avoid any major conflict. Galileo, in the next century, wasn't so lucky. The Italian thinker supported the Copernican view and angered the authorities within the Roman Catholic Church. Really, the conflict had very little to do with physics or astronomy. It was what Galileo said. He claimed that the Bible was open to interpretation, and that Scripture needn't conflict with what science had revealed about the universe. That angered church leaders who felt he was encroaching on their intellectual turf. Galileo was eventually tried for heresy and placed under house arrest. Copernicus fared much better. He never suffered directly for his beliefs. Even so, he waited years, decades even, before allowing his work to be published. In fact, his ideas might never have seen the light of day if it hadn't been for a young German mathematician and clergyman named Georg Joachim Rheticus. Rheticus paid a visit to Copernicus in Frombork in 1539 and urged him to publish his theory. That encounter, by the way, forms the heart of a wonderful short play by Deva Sobel called And the Sun Stood Still. Copernicus's theory was finally published in 1543. The book was called De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium, or On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres. And there was a surprise in the book. The published version contained an anonymous preface, urging readers to treat the idea of a sun-centered universe as a mathematical convenience, rather than as a literal description of the cosmos. We now know that the preface was written by a Lutheran clergyman named Andreas Osiander. Copernicus died a short time after being presented with the first published copies of his book. Copernicus continued to spark controversy even after he was dead. For one thing, no one was quite sure where his remains were located. In 2005, archaeologists finally found what they believed to be his bones beneath the floor of the cathedral in Frombork. DNA testing seemed to confirm it. In 2010, he was given a second funeral, and his remains were buried in Frombork Cathedral in the same spot where his bones had been found. Today there's a modern memorial beside the tomb. It features a stylized representation of the solar system, and an inscription that honors Copernicus as the inventor of the heliocentric theory, and as the canon of Varmia. And you can actually see the casket containing Copernicus's bones through a small glass window in the cathedral floor. By now, we pretty much take Copernicus's breakthrough for granted, but think about the intellectual leap that he made. The Earth feels perfectly still beneath our feet. To realize that it isn't, that our planet is actually moving through space at tremendous speed, took an extraordinary leap of the imagination.